Hello. Sorry, that was awfully aggressive. Let me try again. Hello, and welcome back to the channel and to episode 2 of Downfall Mall. Much better. In this series, we're building a post-apocalyptic theme park somewhere in Florida. Terribly overwhelming. Last week we created our entrance, the mall itself, including a lovely little Just a Memento gift shop, whilst today we'll be creating our first food shop and, if you can believe it, our first ride. Anyway, I've been talking for at least 2 hours, so let's get into the video. The inspiration for this shop came from the well-loved Noodle Bar in Diamond City, Power Noodles from Fallout 4. Whilst I love the open buffet style of Power Noodles, the in-game shops don't lend themselves well to it, so we're forced to go enclosed. You'll notice I began with a recklessly placed circular path, however I soon came to my senses and squared it off. You'll just have to suffer with me as I try to build on these ridiculous angles for the time being. I used fiberglass cargo pods and cargo carriers as the walls. Absolute lunacy, I know. This rear wall ended up being one of the most painful experiences of the build and possibly my life. I simply couldn't get the angles to mirror one another and was the final straw when it came to the circular path. I created a trim out of cargo crates. Yes, that's a new one for me, but it worked great. As you'll see, this build starts to introduce a futuristic feel to the park, perhaps giving us some reference of time to add to the park's lore. I did, however, want to balance these pieces with a more industrial vibe to push cyberpunk rather than sci-fi. I was keen to make this restaurant a key focal point and park weenie, so I went tall. I created a giant noodle bowl motif, and now as I say this I realise I definitely should have added some chopsticks, so I'll likely go back and do that. I gave everything a base coat of grey and left it to dry whilst I worked on other parts of the build. That's not really a thing, I'm just doing comedy. And finally I came to my senses and tidied up that god-awful path. Aren't 90-degree angles wonderful? With the new pathing in place, I could neaten up the shop walls and the perfectionist in me could rest easy. Ah, symmetry. Speaking of symmetry, I used some asymmetry when it came to adding some of that aforementioned industrial theming. Much like Rada Valley, I opted for the in-game brands for Downfall Mall, with our Just a Memento out front, and now this wonderful chow mein chow. We can either imagine this noodle sign would be spinning, or much like the animated scenery in real parks, it's probably broken. Time to fill in some gaps with more cargo crates. This time they're upside down? Goodness. It wouldn't be a Little Socks trim without there being trim on the trim itself. This also allows for further recolouring. This build introduces two of the key colours of the park, teal and coral, I guess? I don't know, but they look weathered and faded, and that's what's important. These lovely lights are dual purpose. They're added trim and, you guessed it, lights. What's a Chinese restaurant without some Chinese lanterns? But said lanterns need somewhere to hang from, so I created an overhang using metal walkways. Artificial Artist was a key contributor to this park due to the fact that I used almost every type of their corrugated metal TMTK pieces, so thanks. I gave our walkway some support and then tied some bunting to it because why not? Moving towards the rear of the build, I extended the walls back and created a service entrance. This will shortly be housing a staff room for our very weary employees. I created this shutter using beams, facade scaffolding, locomotive rails, and a colourable panel. As this is a raised structure, a foundation might be useful. I created this using car tyres. Considering this entire park is designed to be a survivor-built settlement, I always kept in mind what would be achievable and the materials that would be accessible to them. As I talk about frequently on the channel, I always try to cover up the default Planko textures. Here I cover up the path edging with coaster supports. Due to the dizzying heights of our raised path, some fencing seemed essential. It wouldn't be a Moomin video without some path cover. I used Idro's metal tread plates, hazard strips, and wooden scaffolding planks. Something as simple as covering the pathing goes a long way in creating a seamless and integrated build. Let's be honest, the best part of any build is adding those final details, and with this park, I'm going all out. I added piping, ducting, more corrugated iron, vents, dirt decals, and of course, more trims. I created a flat roof using basic shapes and added some access in the form of a hatch. Next is the usual roof clutter, including barrels, cabling, planks, and more. We of course need somewhere for our guests to eat their tasty nudes, so I popped some benches on either side to create a couple of seating areas. I cover the whole lot in metal tread plates with a metal trim. And boom, just like that, we're onto the ride. Sorry, I should have warned you. I hope you're okay. I went for the Helion Ring, a ride a lot of you are probably sick of after the New Park Who Dis contest. In an effort to create cohesion, I decided to use many of the same materials as the shop. A main focus here was skinning the ride as tightly as possible without pieces clipping through. Quite the challenge, but you'll be glad to hear I succeeded. Using the back face of various pieces allowed for further recolouring, adding our key colours to the ride. It was all starting to look far too sci-fi, so I began adding those industrial elements. I suppose I should talk about the concept for this ride, shouldn't I? Okay. Well, our lovely settlement needs power in a world where the national power grid is most certainly not being maintained. Well, our Helion Ring just happens to resemble a big old fancy futuristic generator. And with it being so tall, it would also make a perfect lookout tower. So, there you go. The stuff I'm building now makes sense and you have context. Don't you feel better for it? You'll see me continuing to make every effort to mix the sci-fi pieces with those boring present-day materials like metal, wood, and cloth. Ugh. Whilst this tower is mostly aesthetic, access would be very important for maintenance, so I kept health and safety in mind when building. Our settlers would also need means of getting stuff up to the top, so I created a set of 2 pulleys, one for each platform. It was important to keep this rope out of the reach of the general public. We wouldn't want any hooligans swinging from it now, would we? With one side complete, I copied it to the other side. Or t'other side, as a northerner would probably say. I then made some mild adjustments so that it's not an exact duplicate. Time to link the 2 sides together. I used cabling and poles. To square off our Helion Ring, I used basic shapes. Just so you can share my pain, I did this 3 times until it was right, so please sympathise. For the last section, I used hydro beams and colour matched them as best I could. I created a walkway with a central platform using planks, pillars, balcony pieces and fencing. Why this kinetic generator requires a chimney is beyond me, but I'm building one anyway, and even adding some smoke and fire for dramatic effect. I fenced off the perimeter using corrugated iron veranda roof pieces, controversial I know. The movement axes were not my friend during this endeavour, but I persevered. I briefly allowed some humans to enter the park to see how they traversed the ride area, and quickly discovered they clipped through my lovely ride skin. Conveniently, they filtered through very specific spots, so to combat this I created some fake tunnels. I used facade scaffolding, wooden pillars, basic shapes, panels, and cables. And just like that, it will no longer look like our guests are trying to get to platform 9 3/4. Some more basic fencing for the queue before covering the path with metal tread plates. Cohesion. I created a simple exit gate using wooden beams and a wooden sign. I was forced to be slightly more creative when it came to the entrance, so I used spaceship pieces, wooden scaffolding, planks, art shapes, and some of Hydro's lovely TMTK lettering. I decided to name our ride Ion because, I don't know, ions carry an electrical charge and it's a kind of cool name. What do you want from me? The last couple of pieces of scenery finish off our ride and bring today's episode to an end. If you enjoyed yourself, make sure you audibly say so out loud, and yes, I will know if you didn't do it. Also, tell a friend. Although that would involve you admitting you like to watch a guy build pretend theme parks in a video game, so good luck with that. Catch you next week where we add a coaster to the park. Yes, you heard that right, a coaster. Watch that video get more views than all the others. Flippin' coaster nerds. See you then.